And welcome back to Captains of Industry. Still with me in studio is Sipho Nkosi, who is CEO of Exxaro. Sipho, you're a CEO. You're at the top of the tree. You've done very well, and you're a big player in the industry. Let's go right back now and look at your first job, which you must have got about, 35 years ago. What was it?
Well, the first job, after varsity, of course, it was a graduate trainee. I was a trainee for a period of time. And I earned a very, very respectable and a very good salary.
What was it?
450 rands a month. That was very good. It served me very well at the time. I didn't complain. I could pay out all my expenses. I was quite comfortable.
Graduate trainee in which company, doing what?
It was Ford Motor Company in Port Elizabeth. Remember, Ford are still in South Africa building cars, so they had massive plants in Port Elizabeth, and of course I worked there until the time that during sanctions, Ford was encouraged to leave the country, and like many other American and foreign companies, they left the country, and a lot of us, including myself, got retrenched in the process.
What was that like? We hear a lot about it these days, particularly, and things are tough. But retrenchment in those days, perhaps less support, less warning. How did you react?
Well, the sad thing about that, remember, there weren't very many black graduates at the time. So here you are, you're a graduate, and the community and society looks up to you and say, gee, I want my kid to study and be like that guy. And
then he gets retrenched.
All of a sudden you get retrenched, and people look at, how is it possible that, so it brings in a lot of conflicts, pain, anxiety in yourself, and there was no support structure for that. So you could
how did you
just
get
handle
through?
That one.
You must have sat there and said, now how am I going to react to this? What am I going to do?
Well, the first reaction was to say, well, this is going to be easy. I went to school, and therefore I will find myself a job. And I tell you, between February till end of July, I was looking for a job. 1984, and I couldn't find a job. I would fly to Joburg, Durban, look for anything. They go through interviews after interviews after interviews, and there was nothing. Until one day I'm sitting, and I get a telex, not a telex, a telegram. I get a telegram saying, you've been admitted in the US to go and study. And I said, oh, I'd forgotten that I had done some tests along those lines. So I find myself in the US, and that was a great...
let's talk about the letters after your name. There are more letters after your name than in the companies you run. So let's go backwards. That was what, for an MBA or what?
That was for an MBA. So I went to the US, University of Massachusetts. I did an MBA, but I did quite a lot of other courses as well there. During the summer, like for instance, yachting. I tried to do some sailing, and I did a little bit of music, which was just outside my degree requirements. But I think it was really great.
Were you tempted to stay? Because if we think of where South Africa was, you're a black South African, you grew up under apartheid, no question about that. Rigid apartheid in many respects. You got the education, and in the 80s things were beginning to change, but it was also violent and disruptive. There was a state of emergency. Were you tempted never to come back?
There were lots of South Africans in the US, and now and again we would meet. South Africans were in exile, would meet for parties and encouraging one another and participating in protest marches, not only for South Africa but for other countries that like Angola and others. So it was really a great and a vibrant community. But I will tell you what, the director of our program, MBA program, as I was about to finish 6 months, she said to me, hey, do you really want to go back home, because we can organize you a job? And in fact I got a job to stay on. But I think at the time, after that 2.5 years, I decided, no, I wanted to go back home.
So you came back to what?
I came back to nothing, but I came back to a hope that I would find a job. And because then, at the time, Anglo-American had sent some scouts. I don't know how they identified us, they found us. and they encouraged me to join the coal division at Anglo-American, which eventually I joined.
So that was the route into mining?
That was the route into mining. So I was at AmCoal, it was as it was called then, and Dave Rankin was the MD at the time. So yeah, that's the life. And
interesting that you say that was it, and coal became such a big part of your life because you're from Vryheid in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yes.
I'm down the road from you in terms of origin, Escort in Natal. So we're both
right.
Shark supporters, I hope.
Indeed,
Yes.
indeed.
But Vryheid, of course, Vryheid was coal country. And what was it like growing up there? You must have been aware of the industry, but also a rural town. What was your situation at home in Vryheid?
You know, I looked at the mines as something that was there, but it never was something that I could relate to in terms of wanting to work at a coal mine. But one of the things that we would do, there were these defunct and old mines, and I would remember that my sister and myself and others would go there and look for coal and get into all those very dangerous areas and look for coal and take coal and with in bags and because that's what we were using. But I just love that. We thought we were doing the right thing. But today, looking at on issues of safety and defunct and derelict mines, you know the dangers that we were.
So you were
exposing.
an early version of illegal mining.
Yeah, no. Well, put it that way. Yes, it was.
Your home, a loving home. Were your parents? What work did they do, and what was your growing up like?
Well, my dad was in the religious fraternity, and we're five at home, four brothers and one sister. I am second last brother at home. It was really a very warm, very loving, very disciplined, home with serious discipline.
You worked hard?
Well, I mean, put it this way, the only thing that what my parents would instill in me is that, you know what, we went through difficulties because they were farm boys and girls themselves, and they were ill-treated and mistreated by farmers in Lousberg, where they grew up. Remember, during those days, as in order to stay and to be allowed to stay in that farm area, you had to, even though there were schools that had been introduced by churches, you had to go and work for you had to go to school for 6 months, and you break your schooling for 6 months, and you go back to and work for the farmer for 6 months. If you didn't do that, your family would be ejected out of the farm, that home farmstead. And then eventually some of these timber plantations came to Lousberg, and everyone was kicked out of those farms, and they started planting trees over there. So of course now we all busy with land claims and trying to get back the land. Yeah.
Was it tough for you growing up? I mean, were you poor? Did you have enough to eat always?
I never regarded myself as poor, but I mean, you looking back, you realize that you were really poor. But it was just the norm in the community. That community had nothing. So if it had nothing, whatever was there was normal, was so normal that you thought that's how life was. You never thought that there was something beyond that one. Even your education aspirations, when you went to school, it was not about you becoming CEO, because that was not something for a black child.
Not at that time.
Yeah, I mean, my aspirations was just to become a clerk in a court, or because I didn't want to be a teacher, and that's my life. Yeah.
Are you still in touch with that community? Do you go back there?
I do go back now and again. You look at those areas, and what saddens me is that the devastation of the system in the past, and I made sure that none of those that, for instance, I went to school with at primary level are where I am today. And those, going back to Vryheid, those that I started with probably up till close to matric, just before matric, junior before matric, I don't think there's anyone who advanced as much as I did. So I really feel blessed sometimes that I found myself in this.
Well, they must be very proud of you, because you were one that's gone out of the community and you've gone to big things. Did your teachers at school mark you out? Did they think that there was something about you that might go far?
No, I was not the best of students. I mean, I was one of the top students, but not the best student. I mean, so I was just one of them.
Your father, a religious man, a priest, umfundisi,
Mm.
they would say in Zulu. Tough being a priest's son?
It was tough being a priest's son. Let me just give you a few things that happened. I mean, because my father was a minister in the Dutch Reformed Church at the time. The way they did things differently. And one time, the domineer would come to pick up my father on a Sunday from Melmoth, say to Nkandla, pick him up, and so that they would go and preach. And there's one incident that to this day I've never forgotten. He would have this station wagon of a car, and there's a passenger seat, and he would say to my father, "You can't sit here, my wife sits here." And the two seats, it was this long benched like seats, so we will fold it. So my father would have to bring in a cushion to sit on, not on his seats. And this is a priest, by the way, is a domineer. And those are things that I said, geez, religion is something that is quite interesting. How can people talk about faith, unity, and when these things are happening in their own lives? How can they even preach to people if this is what they're doing? And we confronted my dad at some point, and he said, you know what? I didn't get called by this guy. I got called by my master. So I reported the master, not to him. So it was his life.
Good answer for a priest to make. Last question for you, Sipho. We run out of time, unfortunately, but things you still want to do in your life, apart from build new companies?
I think there's more work to be done insofar as giving back to communities, insofar as uplifting communities, insofar as being role models, insofar as doing quite a lot of things that will ensure that young people have role models. I'm so happy today that my son now knows that a black person can become a successful CEO. And that's what I would like to spread, that there is hope for you, even when you are downtrodden, when you are in a very difficult situation. You can do quite a lot of things in life.
Well, it's a privilege. We grew up in the same province, far apart, and it was a privilege that our paths have crossed again here today. So
Yes, sir.
thank you, Sipho.